It's time for the Sicilian Kalashnikov again. I've been sent a game by a viewer of the channel who's an enthusiastic practitioner of the opening. Thank you to Oniel Revilla from Venezuela, who recently played this training game against a friend of his, Victor Abiad. Both players are candidate masters. If you're a Kalashnikov fan, I'm sure you're going to find this interesting, but even if it's not your thing, not your opening, there are some very good positional lessons to be taken from this game. So here we go. Victor Abiad playing white, Oniel Revilla playing black. e4, c5, the Sicilian, and knight c6, and white plays the open Sicilian. So that's exchanged, and e5. So this is the start of this whole complex of variations called the Kalashnikov. And white has a lot of options here, but there's only one which is really decent. There's only one that puts black under pressure, and that's knight b5. Now that's not obvious to everyone. A lot of people don't actually go in for this, but in my opinion, it's the best move. But it's also very complicated, and that's what's interesting from black's viewpoint. So d6, so that's really the start of the Kalashnikov, stopping the knight coming into d6. And white has quite a choice here, but there are basically two main moves, either knight c3, knight b1 c3, or c4. A lot of people feel that this big clamp on the center is the sort of principled way for white to play. Preventing that d5 break, which so often liberates black's pieces. But there are drawbacks to this move c4, as we're about to see. So bishop e6. Now, you could say the standard move here is knight b1 c3, but, well, Victor plays bishop e3. Now that's a little bit unusual to develop the bishop at such an early stage in the game. And there are a few things we can do. I think Oniel's reply is excellent. Knight f6. So it puts pressure on the e-pawn, of course. This e-pawn is attacked, and white has to react to that straight away. And here, knight c3 was played. Well, it's the natural move. I'll come back to this position right at the end, because I think f3 is actually perhaps a better move. So I'll return to this at the end. So anyway, knight c3. a6. So once that knight comes to c3, then we drive the knight back to a3. So it's going to take time for that knight to reroute. And that's one of the things that makes this position, I think, quite playable for black, because white is not wasting time, but consuming a lot of time in redeploying pieces, and, well, this knight in particular. And now Oniel decides to take advantage of the fact that this bishop has developed at a very early stage, and I think plays a very principled move, attacks the bishop. If we can take that dart-squared bishop, then that's positionally a big deal. Black certainly benefits, because these dart squares are very attractive for black's pieces after that. One, I know it doesn't look like much of a piece at the moment, but at some stage that bishop on f8 is going to come into the game and we'll have no opponent. So bishop c1, I can understand that move. I think it's correct to go back. And Oniel felt that he should try to punish white's, going back and forth with the bishop with this move, queen b6, threatening mate in 1. So he wanted to seize the initiative. And queen f3 was played, which is certainly very provocative. I mean, I think the best move here is queen d2. At least the queen isn't going to be attacked, and then something like this could happen. And yeah, maybe knight d4. Also possible to play bishop h6. That's an interesting hit. But anyway, queen f3. So black continues with knight d4, and now we see one of the reasons why playing e4 and c4 has its positional disadvantages, because that square is sometimes available for black's knight to hop in. In my book, in my Chessable course, I called this the Trojan horse. Very often you can actually sack a pawn here by playing knight d4, and it just opens these diagonals, opens lines for black. I mean, here we're not sacrificing a pawn, or we're not sacrificing anything. That knight just looks splendid. Attacks the queen, which moves to the side. I sort of understand why Victor went for this, because on d2 the queen looks a bit funny, and you could say, white's pieces look harmonious with the queen on g3 rather than d2. However, it does consume a lot of time. That knight has come to d4 with tempo. And Oniel now exploits that very well by playing h5. So he wants to pursue this initiative. If you're kind of in control, if you're pushing your opponent around, just keep going. It's very understandable. And it certainly upsets white here. So the game went h3. And knight f6. Oniel said he didn't want to play h4 and push the queen back to a better square on d3, which is fair enough. Knight f6. Bishop d3. So white decides, right, listen, I better get some pieces out. I better get my king out of the middle. But watch what happens. h4. So the queen goes back to e3. Not a beautiful square, particularly after we see this next move, g6, because that might enable the bishop to come to h6, hitting the queen again. So it's already quite unpleasant for white. The game went castles and knight h5. So it's interesting, this knight now heading for the outpost on f4. We've already got this knight on the d4 outpost. I think this is the thing with the Kalashnikov. You get this fixed pawn structure, and those outposts are very important squares. And if you can land a piece there, it's often very good. So knight d5 played, and that was taken off. Now Oniel played knight f4. In fact, I think it might be even better to play bishop h6 and exchange bishops first, and then play knight f4. I mean, that means, well, you can see that, well, those knights, I mean, they just reign supreme once that dark squared bishop has gone. It's a beautiful position for black. 2 Trojan horses in one game. That's fantastic. But Oniel played knight f4 straight away. It's also a good move. Although knight c2 would keep white in the game, just challenging the knight on d4. But instead knight c4 played, and now the queen bounced round via its starting square. It's coming over to g5. So this is really, really dangerous for white. In the Kalashnikov course, I talk about the bad bishop bounce from e7 to d8 to b6 on this fantastic diagonal. But this is the bad queen bounce. I don't know if it's a bad queen, but anyway, it's the queen bounce coming around to the other side of the board. Actually, we have had that before in one of the games I've shown. Rook d1, b5 played, the knight came back to e3, and bishop h6. So this is starting to look very, very unpleasant for this queen. Now, in the game, king h2 was played, but we haven't had a think and drink moment for some time, so let's do one of those. Instead of king h2, the game move, what would you play on queen e1? So it is black to play. What would you do next? Have a good think, or have a good drink. Well, I hope you spotted there's a very strong forcing move. Knight f3, forking king and queen. When that's taken, queen g5 and queen g2 mate. Beautiful. Oniel said he was kind of dreaming of this continuation, hoping it was going to happen. But instead, Victor played king h2. But in fact, black is winning anyway. In a slightly less spectacular style, but anyway, this is very good. Have a look at that poor queen on e3. Attacked by the bishop. It's absolutely helpless. Trapped. And the game finished like this. Queen takes. Rook takes. So the queen is gone. And now g5. Just to add insult to injury. g5 traps the bishop. And of course, that's an overwhelming material advantage for black. Queen is coming here very soon to take the bishop and do some damage on the king side. Well, really nicely played game. Well done to Oniel, Revilla, and thank you for sending it in. It's always nice to have, the suggestions that you make, you throw out into the world, and you don't know how they're going to get on. But it's really nice to have this kind of validation when a player comes back and says, "Yeah, it worked for me." So thank you again. I just want to go back to that position right at the start after bishop e3. So just bear with me. Let's just fill in a few details. Here we go. So yes, here is where knight c3 was played. But instead of that, f3 looks more reliable because it supports the e-pawn and of course prevents this knight from moving to g4 to hit the bishop. This position has been seen a few times. I found a game, for example, between, well, who was it? It was Maghsoodloo, Parham Maghsoodloo, former world junior champion from Iran. A really strong player who is quite an exponent of the Kalashnikov. And this is how he dealt with it. So he likes this continuation with g6. That's my recommendation in my Chessable course. So I think this bishop, the fianchettoed bishop, offers black some really dynamic chances. And he went for it straight away with knight h5. So, similar kind of idea to Oniel. He's putting his knight on the outpost on f4. And this very often occurs in this variation. Notice that with the pawn on f3, we can take advantage of the fact that that bishop can no longer hit the knight. And the game, I think this was an online game. It went castles, knight f4, knight d5, and Maghsoodloo simply left that knight on f4. And this was taken, and bishop takes. There you go, that dynamic bishop coming into play. Bishop came back, exchange, rook takes b7. So black is a pawn down at the moment, however, it's recovered very quickly. And, well, you can see that black's pieces are just a little bit more active than white's. And in fact, Maghsoodloo, he's an excellent technician. He actually went on to win this game. Let me just see who it was played against. It was played against Lei Quang Lien, an online game. So in 2022, that's a serious opponent. Yeah. And just one more thought, because there's another way you can play this actually. I mean, the way that Maghsoodloo played leads back into kind of the main lines that I was advocating. But there's a game between Vachier-Lagrave and Grishuk that went bishop e7. And I quite like this now that the bishop is already on e3. Let me show you why. This is how the game went. Again, this is an online game played in 2024. Because Grishuk is ready for this so-called breakout bishop, a very typical maneuver in the Kalashnikov. And with the bishop already on e3, it makes even more sense to play the bishop to g5. Somehow white is losing a tempo because sometimes the bishop is on c1. And here I think already black has very nice play with potentially these knights hopping into c5 and d4. And in fact, and the game ended in a draw. It was quite complicated, but Grishuk's position was absolutely fine. So there we go. I hope you found that interesting. So Kalashnikov in some ways is a very strategic opening, using these outposts on f4 and d4 for the knights. If you're interested in learning more, then do check out my Chessable course, Kalashnikov, and also there's the book from New in Chess if you prefer that format. I'll put the links down below. Thanks for watching.